All right, it is just after 1 o'clock here in Orlando, Florida, and it is about noon in Minneapolis. So we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. From BWF and First Name, this is Next Gen Annual Giving, a new series of discussions about the future of fundraising. Today, we're going to be talking about what's changing in annual giving following a tumultuous 18 months in which sometimes it seemed like everything in the world had changed forever. I'm James Barnett, Associate Vice President at BWF, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Justin Ware, the Chief Consulting Officer of the most personal company in fundraising, First Name. Good afternoon, Justin.
I was muted. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. Good to see everybody logging on. I appreciate it.
You know, we have some great people here with us today, Justin. We're going to meet the panel in just a moment. But before we get started, I thought I should ask you, what does Next Gen Annual Giving mean to you?
Yeah, great question. More than just a tagline, right? To me, it means just really meaningful interactions with everyone in your database, personalized, meaningful interactions. You know, it means a lot of content. If you're able to produce a lot of content, you're able to get more personalized on the individual level for some donors, but maybe on at least the segment level for other donors and being really active there. You know, it means no cold asks. It means sophisticated warming. It means using all the tools and all the channels so you can meet donors where they are, whether that is, you know, on a direct mail program or a phone program, or increasingly in digital channels during a giving day, crowdfunding, email, text message, whatever it is, being multi-channel so that you're meeting donors where they are. So to me, it's personalized, it's meaningful interactions at scale, and it's meeting donors where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think it's all of those things. And also perhaps an acknowledgement that the purpose of annual giving is sort of changing for some organizations, not everywhere, but oftentimes strategies are evolving to meet the new needs of fundraising programs, and annual giving is playing a really important and changing role in those programs, contributing to the pipeline in meaningful ways. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So I think it's a good time to meet our inaugural panel of innovative leaders. You know, I knew we were going to get a great response when we announced this group, but it has been truly overwhelming. Just super excited that these 4 individuals are with us today to have some great conversations. I did ask each of them to describe what they do in just 3 words, and I'll be using those words in my introductions. So first up, he creates, he innovates, and he partners. He's the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Alumni Annual Giving at the University of Pittsburgh. Please welcome Jake Strang.
Thanks, James. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Jake. Glad to have you with us. Next up, you know, rules just simply do not apply to her. I asked for 3 words. She gave me 4. I have to say it's still less words than in her job title. She told me they're hyphenated and asked if that counted. I said, no, it doesn't really count, but it works. So data-driven decision-making. It's the Assistant Vice President of Advancement Strategies and Technology Innovation at the University of Oregon, the remarkable Lacey LaRue.
Thank you, and hello to everybody.
Hello, Lacey. Thirdly, we have a part-time DJ and a full-time annual giving guy. He describes himself as a strategic community builder. We know him as the Senior Director of Annual Giving at the Oregon State University. It's Tyrell Warren Burnett.
Thanks, James. Excited to be here with the great panel.
Thanks for being here. And last but certainly not least, I don't think anybody has ever summed up annual giving more accurately in 3 words. Complete, utter chaos. She's the Assistant Vice President of Philanthropic Giving and Digital Engagement at the University of Miami. We are thrilled to have Heather Kopik with us today.
Hi, and in kind of lining up with my chaos, this is Yoko. She heard a Zoom and she's like, oh my God, I have to appear. So chaos continues.
I love it. And I imagine my cat Sue will be with us any moment as well, as soon as he hears all that commotion. So all right, let's jump right in. And I can't think of a better place to start than scrutinizing the very name of this panel discussion, annual giving. Heather, I'm going to come to you first. You don't even have annual giving in your title. What's that all about?
Sure. So it was a decision the university made about 2 years ago, you know, pre-pandemic, as they were trying to think about how we organizing our work to be ready for the future. And little did we know that the future was going to involve a pandemic and a total transformation for our work. And I think when we really think about it at my team, that your identity matters and it's a point of pride in what your team is called. And the idea of annual giving, it wasn't something that the team was doing, and it was kind of holding holding them back from being forward thinking and innovative. And so your name matters a lot. And then this is helping us really break the mold of what should we be doing to what's our ideal state and how do we really continue to be at the forefront of our work.
Absolutely. Tyrell, you do have annual giving in your title. Is what Heather said reflective of what you're doing?
I think it's very reflective of what I'm doing, I think, as an organization. But I think as you start to see the evolution of annual giving, you'll start to see new names. I know now the hot buzzword, donor experience officer. I think we're all about providing experiences through annual giving. Now, I think that's really been the evolution of a lot of what annual giving does. It's providing an experience for those baseline donors to engage and then get them in the fold.
Yeah. You know, the traditional annual fund program tended to be about raising current use funds. For a lot of schools, at least that's what it was. And often there was this sort of focus on asking people to give once a year. So Jake, is that what you're doing at Pitt?
You know, I don't think it is. And I think it goes back to what Heather and Tyrell were saying is that, you know, we are doing more than just annual asks. And so when you look at the way that our programs are focused at this point, we may start off with asking for one thing. We may pivot to asking for another. I hate using the word pivot after the last year and a half, so I'm just going to call myself out on that one. But I do think that we've got to recognize that we've got to be where our donors are and asking them for what they want. We see different initiatives across the board that are really different second ask components that are helping folks move up the pipeline. But also, we know that if we make compelling stories, folks are going to give where they want and how many times they want. And so I think that we are asking multiple times in a year, but also for multiple areas.
Yeah. Lacey, you were an annual giving professional, like solely focused on that. And more recently, you've sort of taken on this different role where you're looking at data and technology and how that impacts strategy. So from your perspective, how is this affecting annual giving at the University of Oregon?
Well, first I would say, I think once an annual giving professional, always an annual giving profession. It's not something that you can easily leave. You know, my new role does focus kind of holistically on all of advancement here at the University of Oregon, including the Alumni Association development, even working with some of our government community relation folks around strategies and technology and data and infrastructure. And I think, you know, I came to University of Oregon and was really focused on the annual giving team and had an opportunity to work with some other teams that were like prospect research and development analytics and my time here as well. And what's interesting, I think, is that I think there's never a lack of great ideas in annual giving, and whether that's at University of Oregon or it's a kind of across the field. But I think we get a little held back because of data and technology, and I would probably add infrastructure on that too. And so what I was finding here at the University of Oregon is that we had great ideas, great practices in place. But, you know, we were running into issues like, you know, only, you know, our telefund coming across like 46% wrong numbers. And, you know, kind of that idea of, you know, not having a smooth process of who owned the data and who is responsible for, you know, fixing that problem. But at the same time, I guess this mentality of scrambling to fix the problem rather than asking ourselves this broader question of, okay, well, why do we only have this? Is it an internal thing, or is it our donors showing us, you know, how they would like to be connected to us? And should our strategy, should our approach be to this to more change how we do things on a larger level, or should we just kind of fix this isolated problem? Obviously, we need better phone numbers. That's, you know, but also kind of taking a fresh view on it. And so I was lucky enough that my institution kind of came together and said, for a year and a half, let's talk about how data, technology, and infrastructure is impacting advancement, the industry as a whole. And then let's talk about what's happening here at U of O and how we can, you know, where we're doing great and where we need to catch up, and then let's implement some stuff. And so my position was actually born out of that conversation. And although my heart is always with annual giving, I'm very excited to be working on some of the solutions that will greatly impact in a positive way annual giving, but all of advancement kind of holistically.
Yeah. Sounds like no small task. How are things going for you?
Well, I'm on my 40th day, so like obviously I have everything figured out. So
Yeah. But I think what you're speaking to as well is increasingly more and more collaboration among different departments within advancement. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more today as well. Just staying on the Pacific Northwest, Tyrell, I know you've had a pretty significant digital transformation at Oregon State. And you're telling me recently that you've used annual giving as a sort of testing ground for some new concepts. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. And I think it correlates a lot to what just Lacey just said in terms of the data infrastructure and technology pieces. One thing that we've done as an organization here at Oregon State University Foundation is really look at it from a holistic lens on what do we want our digital transformation to be, and how does key players within the foundation do that, whether that's from a data standpoint, a marketing communication standpoint, but also an annual giving standpoint. And one thing that has really helped us the last year is we've created a digital advocacy council. And what that is, it's key members of the foundation. Annual giving is one of the leads on there. Someone from our data team and someone from our marketing team are pod leads. And then you have key stakeholders from the foundation. That's been really pivotal for us in terms of moving the needle in terms of our digital transformation. And kind of how we use that as a testing ground is like we had different concepts that we would kind of throw against the board within that group. You know, what did we want our experience to be through web? What did we want our experience to be through our online giving portal? What did we want our experience to be through email? And then from there, we created different pods, and how does annual giving play a factor in that pod? How does marketing communications play a factor? And then from there, build the people process and the technology in order to implement that. And with that, you know, some things such as like the email market service provider, you know, the one we had before wasn't really automated. We couldn't do journeys. So coming on, adding in the new email service provider, annual giving ended up being a testing ground for some of the initial donor journeys that we did from email marketing standpoint. And with that, about 2 years ago, we did a test segment with recent grads that had never been engaged, don't donate back to the university, and kind of fed them through a different path of emails based on kind of how they were interacting with us. And then from there, they would get fed down a solicitation path. So that's just one of the examples of how we're really using the digital advocacy council to like test different ideas. And then from there, how does it play within certain aspects of either annual giving, marketing communications, and or data. And we've been able to do that from the email marketing standpoint, as well as the one that's been more recent is really creating donor journeys, as well as using artificial intelligence for a lot of different components on that. So really meeting the donor where they're at, delivering them meaningful content.
So I love this idea of a digital advocacy council, and you're being really intentional about that collaboration. And I know you're fortunate to have Mark Koenig with your team as well. Can you tell us what it's like to have someone like Mark in a leadership role?
Having Mark is amazing. Like I'd say he's probably one of the geniuses within the industry, and just having someone in your organization that really gets it from a digital transformation standpoint makes things a lot easier, as well as him being on the senior leadership team. It allows him to see the big picture on how, not only how it affects annual giving, but how it affects the organization. And I think with any new pilot that we take, we always start small, and then from there, how does it expand to the rest of the organization? And having him on board really helps to that expansion across the whole organization from an organizational lens.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, having these partnerships is so important. I think annual giving is increasingly part of this larger strategy that really supports the pipeline development, prospect development, major gifts pipeline. And it's very common now to see annual giving closely aligned with alumni and donor engagement activities as well, collaborating with these teams on campus. Jake, who are some of your most important partners within advancement that you partner with?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, when you talk about partnerships, and one of the reasons why I chose this as one of my 3 words is because, quite honestly, we're not successful in anything we do in annual giving without having strong partners. And so, the traditional one that comes to mind is obviously your marketing and communication staff, looking at how you partner with them, not only for content, but also execution. And so we have to have a thumb on what's going on outside of just annual giving. Are there engagement emails going? We also have to work with our prospect managers, with our individual giving teams to know kind of their solicitation cycle also, and what's happening in their pipeline development and with their prospects. So that's one of the things that we've worked on over the last 2 years at Pitt, is really integrating annual giving across the board. So we're constantly meeting with folks within our individual giving teams. We're meeting with them across donor relations. We're also meeting with our school and unit partners, of course, marketing and communications, but even up to principal gifts. So much of what we do is broad-based marketing, and it's really about our brand as we put it out there. And so we've all got to be aligned, and we've got to be very conscious of that as we put it out to our partners, but also to our external audiences for alumni, parents, friends, any of those. But I do think that to Tyrell's point, it starts at the top with great leadership and building that partnership and really realizing that this whole thing is really all of us coming together to be successful. And so we've got to have a thumb on what's happening both internally from a giving perspective, but also externally as well.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts on how to make this happen? Because it's sort of intuitive in some ways that we'll never be as successful on our own as we would be if we partner with others. But sometimes, we've probably all been in this situation where you go to another team and ask for help, and that just sounds like more work for them. And of course, everyone wants you to be successful, but they have limited resources too. Can you describe any ways, and this can go to anyone on the panel too, if not Jake, but ways you've been successful getting others on board, selling those ideas, and really encouraging people to get excited about the things you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to take it to a higher view too, and just say, okay, this is how this is going to work. If we're looking at the life cycle of a donor, it's not just the ask, and it's more than that. And so we've got to get folks to realize that we're all playing a piece of this. I know no one likes meetings just to have meetings, but at the same time, actually getting in a room or a virtual room and having those conversations. But I mean, the other piece of this also is getting leadership on board. And I don't just mean within our advancement divisions. We've got to also work with our deans. We've got to work with our provosts. We've got to work with deans of students. We've got to be more externally facing to our internal audiences to get their buy-in to make sure that we're successful. Obviously, I'd be curious to hear what everyone else thinks of that too.
I can.
Oh,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Tyrell. I would never interrupt Tyrell.
I would say I think I echo what Jake says. I think one thing that has helped me, I think you do what any good fundraiser do. You sell the idea. You treat it like the fundraising cycle. I said this in another webinar I was in not too long ago. Like, you treat it like the fundraising cycle. You have your cultivation, you have your stewardship, and then you have your ask. Your ask is getting the support. So you build your case for support like you would any fundraiser was, and you kind of do that. Build your case. Get people buy-in, feedback, and you paint the story on how they can be involved and make a difference in whatever project that is. And it makes it a lot easier for them to buy in once they know what the end goal is and how they impact that long-term, whether it's a short-term effect on the university or long-term. You have to paint the picture on how they can get involved, and it goes back to them seeing their piece of the puzzle within that larger big picture.
Lacey?
I was just going to add on top of it. I think everything that Tyrell and Jake said is 100% true. I do think that there is an educational component to it. And I also, I think we work with some folks who are, I don't want to say individual contributors, but they're very focused on what they need to achieve. And sometimes it's hard to kind of take into consideration anything that doesn't perfectly align with how they think they're going to move forward or progress towards their goals, or however we want to put it. But I think even broader than that, we've seen so much change and evolution in the industry in the last decade. Think 10 years ago, who out there was measuring engagement? Who was doing a great job of tracking what events you went to, or what digital articles you clicked on? And, I think 10 years ago, we could probably safely say like nobody, or very few institutions. And now that has become such a cornerstone of the data that we want to collect, and the data that, kind of gets us to the next spot. If we can get this information about them, what kind of conclusions can we offer to them, which means what kind of experience can we give to them, that it kind of takes you down that roadmap. But I would say that I think we still work with colleagues, and I think we still work with colleagues probably at every institution, that they don't see that big picture. So sometimes that education and that exposure to the industry holistically and the conversations that are having in that are really important to getting buy-in, I think, and to creating those partnerships, because you might be challenging the way that a person in leadership is actually thinking about how fundraising should work or how it's always traditionally worked for them. And so I think it's kind of an interesting spot to be in, especially for annual giving programs, which are so innovative. They're always bringing something new to the table, and there's so much change in there. And but then I think we have other parts in development or advancement that don't grow that fast, don't evolve that fast. And being able to have those conversations and helping people see the bigger picture, I think, is a huge part of that.
I would add on top of all this, it's figuring out what are their goals and how can you find a quick win where your goals are aligned, and find a couple of those in the short term to build that trust, that partnership, and that when you're asking them to do something, it's really helping them achieve their goals and you're getting that win at the same time. And then you can set timelines and horizons for those more complicated things. Because if I asked someone today to like, let's completely redo all of our annual or online giving stuff to only do reoccurring gifts. Well, we know that's probably the right thing to do. My colleagues are like a year and a half behind us, but how can I like have those wins, plant that long-term seed, and then we're going down the path together rather than suddenly like I'm sprinting in this direction and I got a colleague going in that direction. So I'm all about those short wins and build that relationship. And then we can tackle those larger things together when they've got more time and education to understand the why and the how, and then we have a better result in the product, or better product at the end result.
Yeah, the one thing that I think that we maybe miss though too is just recognition at the end too. It's not a win for annual giving, it's a win for our institution. And so when we're forging these partnerships, when we take on extra projects and we bring in our partners the way that everyone's already talked about, it needs to be known that annual giving didn't take a step forward. We all took a step forward together, and that we couldn't have done it without our partners. So almost to Tyrell's point about, you know, the donor solicitation cycle, like that's the stewardship at the end, is recognizing that we just did something cool. We just did something big, and we all did it together.
Yeah, that internal stewardship piece. I mean, so many great points. I think a lot of you probably worked on giving days that when they're really successful have brought in assistance from many different departments, and seen some really great examples. Rachel at the University of Utah springs to mind of post-giving day sort of internal celebration where they're kind of recognizing their colleagues for all their contributions. So important to not miss that step. Speaking of big significant projects, Heather, I know you've done some really incredible work with your team around lead generation, really kind of leading the way in higher ed fundraising here at Miami. Super important to next gen annual giving. Can you tell us about lead generation in your program and what that sort of looks like and some of your metrics?
Sure. So I think that goes back to, you know, the larger why of why do we have philanthropic giving and why are we trying to engage people? And for us, that why is how are we continuing to move people through and find those that next kind of generation of leadership and major donors. We're really lucky at the U that, you know, wealth and capacity is not our issue. So it's taking these great leads and identifying, okay, how can we find the 1,000 best? And we say that loosely because we're still trying to figure it out. But the goal is, how are we identifying 1,000 warm leads every year from digital engagement or base entry-level philanthropic giving activity, and passing them to my counterpart in lifelong engagement. And her team is then qualifying those 1,000 people every year. And then they identify the top of those to pass to major gifts. And for us, that's really the why we do this work. That APR is great and donor counts are great, but the core of the why is that pipeline health. And so rethinking small bite-sized ways of how are we setting 1,000 qualifications every year. And then our team now that we sort of have that figured out is, okay, how are we making sure those 1,000 leads are warm and ready? So that's our new like vague thing we're trying to figure out of what is warm and what is ready. And so we're starting to throw people into different journeys for warming cycles to see, okay, are you biting this or would you rather bite that? So we're being better partners for that pipeline work. I think the other metric my team is really trying to get to of how are we getting to this 3-to-1 engage to ask ratio. So trying to get that donor readiness aspect in there. So it's not just, hey, we've texted you 10 times, now give us money. Like, how do we warm that up a little bit and make it something that's a little bit more balanced and really reflective of the ecosystem of communications and activities that are going on. So fuzzy, big goals, but I think I like to be fuzzy and gray because I think that's really where the next generation of our work lives.
Yeah. I was just so impressed when I heard that you have a metric around 1,000 leads. And I'd love to hear from any of the audience members today. They can put in the chat if any of their programs literally have that as one of their sort of top level annual giving metrics, is the number of leads that you can pass on to others in the advancement program. Anyone else on the panel? Are you currently measuring leads generated, or is that something on your radar?
I will say that it's a relatively new metric here, and we don't call it leads generating, but we do measure the moves management out of annual giving up into other levels of the pipeline. So kind of the same thing, a little bit different.
And Lacey, obviously pipeline development is extremely important in your new role. At Oregon, how does annual giving sort of fit into this work?
My previous position before stepping into this one was actually overseeing pipeline programs. And so I was very invested in building out those teams that we had kind of defined as pipeline related. So, prospect research, engagement, annual giving, leadership, annual giving. And so that was a lot of, I guess, both philosophical work and tactical work about how it kind of flows together. It was an interesting role to be in. And I, we were so excited about what we saw, but I think that pipeline continues to be a giant part of my role, as you just said. And actually what I ask my new team a lot is, let's talk about how we're going to identify the next generation of donors to the University of Oregon. And, not only how are we going to do it, but going back to data and technology again, because that's kind of my job. But what data points and what technology we need to do it well, accurate, and quickly. And so we have a lot of those kind of conversations, and that leads us to conversations of, okay, what kind of strategies do we need to put in place? Where do we need to make recommendations that we actually increase our resources in this area? Because we know the work that it's doing is generating closer relationships between constituents in our institution, and getting people into the pipeline or moving them up quicker, kind of thing. When it comes to annual giving, I've always thought annual giving is an incredibly important role in pipeline development. I'm completely biased, right? So, obviously it's the most important role in pipeline development, because that's what, usually gets you to make your first philanthropic gift to an institution. And I know that there's pipeline activity before it, and obviously there's pipeline activity after it, but that conversion from being engaged and having a relationship to becoming a donor, I think, is a big one. And if we do it right, and if we do it right in the eyes of the donor, then, we've prepared them to be part of our pipeline for a really long time. And of course, it doesn't stop with that one gift within annual giving, because annual giving still puts a lot of effort and energy into moving them through the pipeline in a strategic way that, again, feels good for the donor. But I think that we can give a lot of credit to annual giving as that conversion point, and that makes it a pretty critical part of the pipeline.
Awesome.
I'm going to jump in real quick here. We're getting a ton of questions, and that's fantastic. I apologize in advance. I know we won't get to all of them live. Doesn't mean we can't follow up after the fact. So we're recording everything, and we'll be sure that we get to your questions at some point here after the webinar if we don't get to them live. But I want to ask one right now, because this is one that I keep seeing pop up. It's the question we're most frequently asked. What about phone? What are we doing with phone? How are we re-envisioning it? How are we reimagining it? Are we doing it at all? And if we aren't doing it, how are you replacing it? So for all the panelists here, Heather, I think you've already answered, so maybe you want to go first. What about phone? Are you ending the phone program? And if you're not ending the phone program, how are you re-envisioning it for the modern era?
So we've ended it. Miami ended it as a kind of result of the pandemic, and there was, it was in a steep decline, but long before that. And my prior institution, we also took a hard look at in March 2020 of like, why were we doing a film program, and what was it? What was the lift that it was having on our goals, and were we actually doing it in the right way? And when we sat there and looked at the warm fuzzy feelings about why we had it, the business practicalities and the problems it was trying to solve, and really then the lift on was it making a difference on our core metrics, we sat there and looked at all these things, and the answer was no, no, and no. And that we were keeping it because we felt like it was this warm connection point, but we weren't seeing any moves management coming from it. The average gift wasn't going up. It was most successful for parents. And when we said like, that's not our core audience and our biggest priority, we decided to end it. So there is a vacuum, and we did lose donors. Miami did, and my previous institution did, but it wasn't significant enough to be worth that investment. And so my leadership at both places have kind of been charged with how are you using digital engagement or staff outreach to try to get there. So we've been able to mitigate some of that stuff because there is this really small group of people who just need a phone call and they'll give, but it wasn't for us worth the time right now to be in a call center. And so we're reallocating those resources and putting them into digital engagement, putting them into ads and SEM and Google work. And we're starting to see 2 years later, or like 18 months later, we haven't lost donors. And now we're starting to see that pick up with engagement, repeat gifts, and average gift. So every institution is unique. And a lot of it comes down to leadership and what's your leadership willing to do and not do.
I just want to say real quick, just some evidence-based thoughts on this. We have seen with a student engagement team in place, the difference in a giving day. So the growth from one giving day to the next year, or even the best giving day to the next year at one institution, that number of unique donors during the giving day was greater than the entire previous year of phone donors. So with a strong digital strategy, I think you can really do a lot to replace the phone program. Just my 2 cents. Anyone else love phone on the panel and really want to keep including phone and using phone in a way that's meaningful?
I will say that I love phone because I started off as a student caller at Iowa State University. But do I think phone is part of a larger strategy anymore? I don't, not in kind of the traditional way that we have held it, or that, maybe we experienced it in the past. A lot like Heather, I think we did a lot of internal assessment on what the phone was bringing, and the resources that it was costing us at the same time. We too ran into, it's so funny to hear that. I think we ran into some nostalgia of, what the phone program meant to individuals within advancement. And we did decide to move away from our phone program. We actually, the year that COVID hit, so the fiscal year that COVID hit, we had already reallocated our telefund to just call and validate cell phone numbers, as I kind of mentioned before. This is an area that we're looking to kind of improve our data around. And so we hadn't been using it for solicitations, and then COVID hit. And again, that caused us to reassess as again. And we went with a program that I know Tyrell has actually worked with a little longer, but maybe in a little bit different kind of iteration of it. But we work with EverTrue to do student donor experience officers. And so we have worked and implemented that last year. It's not phone exclusively. It does involve a lot of different data elements, and we're still kind of figuring out how that fits into the overall strategy because it is kind of new.
I think some places are sort of moving on from phone entirely, and other places are just reimagining what phone means. And, it does still work for some organizations. It often comes down to what we talked about at the very beginning, the objective, the purpose of your annual giving program. And there is a place for phone perhaps in that, but even so, people are really reimagining what it means. Definitely pairing up with digital strategies, texting, video, things like that. I'm going to give the panelists a 30-second break. If this was a podcast, this is where I'd say we'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsors. I just want to come back to Justin and ask you to just give us a quick quick little 30-second spiel about First Name.
Yeah, First Name is a sister company to BWF. We're separate but closely aligned. And we talked about personalization at scale at the onset. That's everything that First Name is about. We have student engagement team programs at multiple institutions now that are working very well to enhance and replace phone. We've got digital development officer programs. We've been doing that for as long as really anyone, since 2014, when we got started with World Vision, and doing a lot in higher education around that as well. And we've got our new Mercury microsites platform, technology to create personalized microsites at scale for everybody in your database. So all of this no cold ass, personalization at scale, it's what we're all about at First Name. And of course, that's why I was interested in the phone question, because we are in the business of replacing phone and immediately in the first year outperforming it. So obviously we love to have conversations about that. James, thank you for the opportunity for the quick plug. We'll hand it back to the experts.
Yeah, and we have the second part of this panel discussion. It takes place next week, next Wednesday at the same time, and Justin's hosting that one. That's all about what will replace the phone. I'm going to talk more about that at the end of today's session, but we've got another 4 incredible, innovative leaders who are going to have a whole bunch of ideas around that. So glad we're able to touch on that just briefly today. Justin, it's great to be here with you, and BWF and First Name have a great partnership. I think we really share a vision for how next gen annual giving can become a reality, and we also offer sort of alternate ways about how we can make that happen. Let's get right back to it. I'm going to come to you, Tyrell. I want to talk about audience development. I know this is some great work that you're doing at Oregon State. I think annual giving program is becoming more and more advanced. It's more and more common to see complex marketing strategies in place to create personalized experiences for your donors. How are you putting this into practice?
Yeah, great question. I think annual giving has served as a stumping ground for creating different audiences. I think as you see now, people want the Amazon-like experience, so we're trying to emulate that Amazon-like experience through some of the things that we're doing. And a lot of that is around audience development and segmentation and sending relevant content to the right people at the right time. I think that's what they're used to, and we're trying to emulate that. And I think what we've been able to do from an annual giving standpoint here at Oregon State is create really good segmentation. A lot of that has been augmented based on some of the strategies that we have in place. And I think one thing that we really have gravitated towards is really personalization at scale. And that comes in a number of different factors. Right now on my team, I have 3 donor experience officers. I know a lot of institutions are starting to create donor experience officers or digital gift officers, whatever you want to call them. It's all the same, but I think where the secret sauce is really the segmentation around that, and then the sales enablement tactics that you use to really move people throughout the fold. So I have 3 members on my team that's able to manage a 1,000-person portfolio and really move them through the donor cycle based on different cadences. And I think that's where the marketing lens that you see, the advanced marketing lens and personalization at scale. But with that, one thing that we've been able to do is really augment the things that they're doing with artificial intelligence. So one project that we're working on here at Oregon State is really, we've been having donor experience officers for 2 years now. With that, there's a lot of, with artificial intelligence, you need positive and negative data to really inform the machine and grow from that. So what we're doing on the back end now is really using that positive and negative data to inform our marketing strategies, not only for the DXOs, but for all of our annual giving appeals. So based on the interactions that they've had, whether from phone, email, or LinkedIn, what's the ideal donor journey, and then how can we build different marketing strategies based on those donor journeys. So really using artificial intelligence to augment a lot of what we're doing and learn from the practices that we've been able to put the last 2 years. And I think one thing as well with that, what we're doing is a lot more warming techniques within our communications to build segmentation. So looking at all the emails that we send as we're having these new initiatives from our Veterans Initiative or our food insecurity, based on the email communications that we send out, the people that are clicking that, now that serves as a base for our segmentation moving forward. So I want to get to a point, at least with our cause-based initiatives, based on the historical data that we have, how can we create a general list of people that may care about this cause? And that's kind of how we've been positioning. A lot of our segmentation is kind of building initial lists of segmentation based on how people have been engaging with us. And I think that's served really well for us. And it goes back to the notion of creating donor journeys based on how people are interacting with us. And a lot of that is through our communications, as well as using AI to kind of augment some of that stuff.
Yeah. Creating that personalized experience is so key. And I really, that's what a lot of people are really trying to focus on doing. Lacey, we've talked a little bit in the past about paying attention to donor interests and preferences, and how you do that in reality. You can ask people, but you can also sort of watch people and listen to people. Can you tell us a bit about your approach to sort of meeting people's preferences?
First and foremost, I think I want to say that when I grow up, I want to be like Tyrell, because that was an amazing answer and gives us something to strive for. And then I also want to agree that so much, I think, is about segmentation. And again, when you ask about interest and preferences, I see that as, kind of the end game being segmentation, which then leads to a better and more customized experience for them as we develop a relationship with them. I think it's funny with the interest and preferences, because I think that you could talk to a lot of people in the industry, and we're seeing some institutions, not everyone, but maybe seeing this shift as opposed to our fundraising priorities not necessarily being easily housed under one bucket. You graduated from this college. This is this college's priority right now. And so this is what I'm going to ask you to give to. But I see that we're creating giving opportunities that are centralized, they're interdisciplinary, and they include a lot of funds underneath them that are kind of bundled together. I think scholarships are a really good example of this, and probably one that's been around for a while. And so, and my work with the prospect research team, we talk a lot about how do you identify people who, could be interested in those new giving opportunities. And maybe that line isn't as direct as it used to be. So how do we update our strategies and kind of moving from maybe an affinity base to a cause base? And I think when we do that, we do have to think about people are showing us, how they want to get involved, and maybe where they philanthropically want to be involved through their interests and their preferences and how they interact with us. And so, this is a journey that we've been on. Tyrell said a lot of great things in there, but we are working with some outside vendors to help us introduce artificial intelligence into our work that would be connected to some of our digital communication and would allow us to better track and to better provide stories and information that are more based around their interests and preferences. One thing that I will say is that we see this discrepancy, and, we might send you a survey, and, James, you might write back and say, you like scholarships and, I don't know, zebrafish research. And, but then what we notice that the only thing that you ever click on is the baseball team, which is great. That's fantastic. But, from your survey, we might have thought that, what we should be sending you and how we should be engaging you is through research and scholarships. But really what you want to talk about, and maybe where your interest is, at least your behavioral interest is, maybe around baseball or a different area within the institution. And so how do we balance both of that information and kind of create a, an experience that gives you what you think you like, but then also what you like at the same time. And so we're working through a lot of that and having those kind of conversations right now.
Yeah, I think the reality is I would click on all of the stories about Tyrell, because I think you're right. We all just want to be like Tyrell when we grow up.
I mean, who wouldn't, right?
I grew up wanting to be like Lacey when I want to be like Lacey when I grow up. She's like amazing.
We've got a lot going on here.
Heather, what about Miami? How are you approaching audience development? Are these sort of same ideas working for you?
Yes, I think one of the other things that Lacey touched on, that what they do and what they say are different. We've tried leaning into causes, and when we were testing it, as like, okay, let's see what their behavior does. Our donors got so confused. They're like, what am I doing? Like, I can't find my fund. And so we're walking back a little bit, that maybe causes was too fast, too soon. And so we're really taking that step back of, maybe we sprinted when really we should be crawling. And so I think when we look at an approach to audience development, you've got to be willing to take some risks and know in other places where you can't take risks. So for like the first half of the fiscal year, when we look at that audience development, it's a relatively not high risk period for us, that we know, like, if we're going to hit our retention targets, we got to get them by 12/31. And so November, December, low risk. Don't change it up. Like, keep it steady. Get those gifts in. They're doing the thing. And then take those more innovative approaches to the second half of the year when you're not risking your retention or your revenue or some of those other core metrics that we just need to have strong in order to do these innovative and fun things. So what we're also trying to do is design strategies around the gaps in our math problem. So part of our math problem gap right now is in acquisition. So we're looking at subsections of where can we test a little bit more, maybe lean in on the causes with a low risk group rather than going into our donors and confusing them, because I left money on the table for Giving Day because we confused donors. I make mistakes too, right? I don't have all the answers. And so for me, we tested, we learned, we're going to do something different. I also think when you're rethinking your audience strategies, always start with your math problem and your why, instead of letting the pretty mail piece or the pretty email or the creative drive your strategy. So if you know your math problem and you know what you're trying to achieve, let that drive first. When we talk about, where are we going and what's our ideal world and all the things that we're testing to try to get there, our ideal world doesn't have segmentation, that a donor is on this journey where it's an N of one. And behaviorally, we're learning what are you interested in, and having that journey just drop those pieces of dropping that engagement touch point or that text or that mail piece just when the machine learning says, hey, they need a little bit more. So that's where we're going. We're going to keep testing along the way. And my goal is to just get like 1% better every time we test something new. That I can't go from like here to 100 miles an hour. Like, let's just get better together and build that confidence that we're doing this the right way and we're doing it in a way that continues to be donor centric.
Yeah, I love it. And thank you for acknowledging that sometimes we try things and they don't always work, and sometimes we have to not be afraid to fail and just see what happens. Tyrell, you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I think we're opposite of Heather in terms of scaling back the cause-based initiative. I think we're putting all our feet forward in it. I think one thing that we've seen, at least from an organizational lens, is I think cause-based initiatives can augment acquisition that you may get through phone. So we've been able to do about 5 different cause-based initiatives the last year. I think the first iteration of that was our student emergency campaign, Beaver's Care. With that kind of created the framework on how I'm approaching all of our cause-based initiatives moving forward. People are giving, they might not be giving to their institution. So how can we position Oregon State or University of Miami or University of Pittsburgh as one of those worthy philanthropic causes? So I kind of created a framework on how we approach different initiatives that we're going to call a cause, which a lot of it is something that's a broad topic that's within the world. And then from there, how can we position Oregon State as a leader in that space, or how can we position Oregon State as solving a problem within their individual community on that cause? And that's been really successful for us. With that, we've been able to do one around Veterans Initiative, which is currently active. We did one around DEI last year. We'll always have our Beavers Fight Hunger initiative around food insecurity. But with that, we've found that through all the ones that we've done so far, about 15% of the overall donor population that we're getting from those different cause-based initiatives are new. So that's serving as another way for acquisition for us. So as we're building out our cause-based initiatives, we're building out a non-donor test segment in all of those moving forward. So that goes back to kind of what I talked about earlier, feeding the machine of AI to try to predict what that non-donor segment will be for our direct mail pieces, so we can augment some of the things that we may be losing from phone.
Yeah, I love it. Jake, you're awfully quiet. Does that mean everything's just going great for you?
Oh yeah, we're just sailing by. Things are going great. Everything's happening. Our budgets are stacked. Our staff is full. We have plenty of people and resources, and that's what every annual giving shop says, right? And so I think that one of the comments that I've often made is that I think annual giving shops are just scrappy, and we know that we've got to come up with new ways to really touch our donors. Going with cause-based initiatives, and Tyrell talked about this, last year was a very, very easy pilot program for us when it came to our student emergency assistance funds and finding out how to acquire new donors by really targeting on one specific fund. We were also one that was very, very fortunate, I guess, in the sense that Pitt has a strong history with providing vaccine research, going back to polio and eradicating polio through the University of Pittsburgh. So we were able to really focus on that in our vaccine research that was happening at Pitt during the pandemic. And what we did see was that we do have donors, not just alumni donors, but community donors within the Pittsburgh area and the Pennsylvania area that are coming on board as a sign of support. And now it's our job to maintain them. And so that's the piece that I think we've got to get to. At its core, cause-based is very similar to crowdfunding, simply because you bring these people in for something very specific. And now we've got to figure out how do we continue to keep them focused on us and then bring them back and retain them. And so one of the things that we've done is we've started looking at some of our cause-based metrics and our crowdfunding projects and saying, okay, these are similar things. And so if we know that you're interested in student emergency assistance funds, maybe you're interested in the food pantry because that's also providing need for students where they need it. Scholarships are so broad that I think that it's become something that is a larger scale. If we can break it down and tell some of these more focused student stories, it does help. It's kind of a return to the basics of annual giving in a way, because over the last year, we've realized that people want to hear stories about people. They want to hear them about the students. And also they want to know what daily life looks like at our institutions right now. Some of us have vaccine mandates, some of us have mask mandates, some of us have all of these different things going on. And it's really changed and shaped the student experience in a different way than a lot of our alums have seen. So being able to really be focused on what we're putting out there and then matching those interests back to specific funds is really helpful as well.
Yeah. I like this idea that, like it or not, to be innovative in annual giving, you really have to be kind of scrappy sometimes. No one's sitting there with just plenty to go around. So, a lot of my work at BWF, I'm working with clients to help conceptualize and implement new ideas. And often that means developing these fundraising marketing programs that support both annual and major giving, often digital first. But what I see a lot is that when clients have a problem and when they're sort of backs against the wall, that's when some of the most meaningful innovation can happen. And they can be a little bit scrappy because they have to be. So let's talk about innovation. We don't have too long left. I do want to say, there's some great questions coming through in the chat. If we don't get to those today, this is the first in our series. We hope that we'll be able to continue to answer these kind of questions as we go forward. So please keep those coming because it gives us an idea of what people are interested in talking about in the future. But just back to innovation, this is kind of our final topic for the day. You have about 60 seconds each. I want to hear from each of you. What's the most promising strategy that you're seeing for annual giving programs? And we'll go to you first, Lacey.
I think that it's not super exciting or anything, but I think the data and how the data integrates, I think the product is exciting, but maybe not the initial idea, but how data integrates into annual giving is probably one of the most exciting topics out there, because I think it is innovative, but I also think it's limitless and it's constantly changing. And, if we have the same conversation next year at this time, there will be new technology, new ideas, new data points that we want to collect and we want to utilize. And so, I would say, data is kind of the most innovative thing happening within annual giving right now.
And Lacey, we're all annual giving people. We all get excited about data.
I know, right?
It is exciting to us.
I misspoke, guys.
Jake?
I think Lacey touches on it, and it all circulates around data and just how do we get data that actually works for us. And so, I think where you're getting it from is also the exciting part. It's not just us using our phonathons anymore to ask you for where you're located and where you graduated from and verify. It's actually about what our institutions are doing outside of just providing an education. And so if we can track those interests, if we can really get to know our donors, investing in digital for this space too, and retargeting based on interest, I think is something that's really, really going to be crucial here. The biggest piece of this, though, is that we've got to be committed to continuing to test and continuing to innovate. And so one of the things that we do at Pitt is we have written in our goals that we will be innovative, that we'll continue to come up with new strategy and really have it in there. But building off of kind of that sense of just data, I think it's interest-based fundraising, it's connecting and personalizing.
Intentional innovation. It doesn't happen by accident. It's got to happen because you plan for it. Tyrell, what about you?
I think for me, I think what annual giving, I think the big thing that we're focused on, I think what you're seeing in the industry, I think Justin Ware's predictions in terms of digital predictions for this year, the year of the donor journey, I think that's going to be at the forefront of everyone's mind. I think people are starting to put their toes in it, but I think that's really where you're going to see the move the needle. And it goes back a lot to what Lacey and Jake said. You're using data to build that donor journey based on interests, preferences, but I think that's really where we're going to move the needle. They're seeing it everywhere else outside of higher ed. Now higher ed, a little bit slow to do it. Now you'll see a lot more donor journeys, and that's one thing that's been at the forefront for us, is creating donor journeys for retention of new donors, as well as how can we create a donor journey for our Leadership Annual Giving Society. And one thing that we're doing here is really creating kind of a reminder donor journey for that $1,000 plus donors. So not every donor makes their $1,000 gift in one swoop. So how can we create a 90-day plan that slowly reminds them that they need to make their gift by the end of that period? So I think donor journeys, and then also personalization at scale that someone said within there. But I think using sales enablement tactics to do it. And that's how you do personalization at scale. You're creating the donor journeys based on sales enablement.
All right, and Heather?
Right, the mute thing still gets me 2 years in. So I think the most promising strategy for this space, beyond technology and beyond data, is building innovation goals into your entire team. And it really starts at the leadership. And one of the things that's allowing Miami to be so successful is that there are core innovation goals for the entire division, and every team has to roll up into that. So that's something you can do without technology, without people, without like new resources, but building that culture of innovation. Subset to that, I would say, then you can start creating an ecosystem of these activities where it's not just annual giving or philanthropic giving or whatever you want to call yourself. Like, we're all solving this together. We just happen to be quarterbacking it for our institutions and for our organizations. And then I think you can get into the idea of technology and those other things to make this work easier, but reminding ourselves that technology doesn't solve our problems. If our data isn't good, technology is useless. And if you don't have a good business case and a good process, technology makes your life 10 times harder. So focus on what you can focus on first, and then keep building, and you'll get there in the long run. Just don't race to technology. I've also been guilty of that too. So hoping someone can learn from me.
That's fantastic. All right, last question for the day, and I'm actually going to ask Justin this one in 20 seconds or less. Personalization at scale. What is it? How do you do it?
I'll pick up Heather said data plus technology. I think to make personalization at scale happen, you need strategy, people plus technology. We've been saying that for years. That's how we started with our giving days. You can have great technology, no strategy, you're sunk. Great strategy, no technology, you're sunk. That's more true than ever before. You need to have really smart strategists who understand the technology they need, know how to use it, and make the most of it. If you do that, then personalization at scale means 80% retention. It means leadership annual giving programs where gift officers are far more effective because they have warm donors and prospects, making them more efficient and more effective. So that to me is personalization at scale means combining strategy and technology to provide more meaningful experiences for everybody in your database.
All right, thank you. Well, join us again at the same time next week for part 2, where we're going to be discussing what will replace the phone-a-thon. Justin's going to be leading that discussion. He's going to be joined by Kelly Sullivan of the University of Texas at Austin, Paul Moite from Stony Brook University, Jeff Hallett at Penn State, and of course, Adam Compton at North Carolina State. My thanks today to our panelists, Lacey LaRue, Jake Strang, Heather Kopic, and Tyrell Warren Burnett, and of course to Justin for co-hosting. If I can leave you with just one parting thought, it would be this. All of the new technology and digital transformation have changed the way that we're able to fundraise. And through all of this, we've seen a really remarkable impact on our profession. And it's very exciting. But a good digital strategy begins with people, because through all of this change, I think one thing remains true, and that's people give to people. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.